The entry point into this study is a document dated August 18, 1960, a brief report from the United States Department of Defense classified at the time with the highest level of secrecy. In this text, devoid of any emotional coloring, it was reported that a capsule dropped from the Discoverer 14 apparatus had been successfully intercepted in the air. At first glance, this is a routine technical protocol. However, for a medieval historian accustomed to analyzing bulls and diplomatic correspondence, this artifact is the equivalent of the Golden Bull, or the secret instructions of an inquisitorial tribunal. This is the moment when the vertical of power ceased to be a metaphor and acquired physical embodiment in the form of an optical lens hovering over the borders of sovereign states. This report marks the end of the era of classical visual reconnaissance and the beginning of the age of technological omniscience, where the right to privacy in private and state life was effectively annulled by the decree of technical progress. Before we delve into the archaeology of this global conspiracy of silence and technological superiority, I ask you to subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue our detailed work with the archives, restore the true chronicle of events, and develop a project free from mystifications and speculations. The political anatomy of the mid-20th century resembles the structure of feudal fragmentation, but on a global scale, where the two largest superpowers operated like closed nightly orders, striving for absolute control over information. By the mid-1950s, the situation had reached a deadlock. Reconnaissance flights of U-2 aircraft over the territory of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which had previously been considered unpunished, became impossible after the incident on May 1, 1960, when pilot Francis Gary Powers was shot down near Sverdlovsk. This event led to diplomatic paralysis and the physical suppression of reconnaissance activity in the enemy's airspace. The political elite in Washington faced a data vacuum. They did not know the real number of intercontinental ballistic missiles possessed by the opponent, which gave rise to the myth of the missile gap. The social composition of the Corona Project's participants was extremely limited. It was a narrow group of top generals, scientists from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and operational staff from the Central Intelligence Agency. The oath system in this structure was stricter than in any monastic order. Breach of secrecy was punished by immediate removal and lifelong surveillance by security services. The mechanics of the conspiracy under the code name Corona, or Keyhole 1, relied on a complex logistical network. Orders were transmitted through courier services in sealed containers equipped with self-destruct systems. Every meeting of project participants took place in locations with no official connection to the government, private residences in Virginia or protected bunkers at air bases in California. Timing was a critical factor. The launch of each apparatus required the synchronization of thousands of employees, most of whom did not even suspect what exactly they were launching into space. For cover, the legend of the Discoverer program was used, which supposedly involved biological research and the study of cosmic rays. According to financial reports, budgets for these purposes were routed through dummy line items for meteorological research. Institutionally, the Corona Project represented the ideal bureaucratic machine, where each segment, from the production of film by Eastman Kodak to the development of cameras by iTech, was isolated from the others. In the Soviet Union, a similar structure developed in parallel under the code name Zenit. If the American system resembled a corporate hierarchy, the Soviet one was built on the model of a military party chancellery. Design Bureau No. 1, under the leadership of Sergei Korolev, was developing the Zenit 2 satellite based on the Vostok spacecraft, on which Yuri Gagarin had flown. This was a model of technological pragmatism. Instead of creating a separate film return system, Soviet engineers decided to return the entire apparatus intact. Documentary evidence indicates that recruitment for this project was conducted exclusively from the ranks of vetted party members and officers who had undergone multi-level checks by the Committee for State Security. Information transmission within Zenit was carried out through the notebook cipher system, where each key was used only once and then destroyed. The process of obtaining images in the 1960s was a logistical nightmare, comparable to smuggling secret correspondence across enemy territories in the Middle Ages. The American system involved dropping a film capsule, the so-called bucket, into the dense layers of the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. The capsule was supposed to deploy a parachute, after which a C-119 airplane equipped with a special hook grabber was to catch it in mid-air. In case of a miss, the capsule would fall into the water, where a salt plug would activate and dissolve after 2 days, after which the capsule would sink to prevent secret data from falling into enemy hands. In August 1960, the first such capsule was successfully retrieved. It contained photographs of Soviet airfields that surpassed in detail anything available previously. However, analysis of these sources requires caution. Modern researchers point out that the early images had significant aberrations due to camera vibrations and temperature fluctuations, so data interpretation often depended on the subjective opinions of analysts in Washington, who could deliberately exaggerate or downplay threats for political purposes. A critical audit of the successes and failures of both programs shows that betrayals and leaks were rare but fatal. In the Corona system, the main problem was technical malfunctions. The first 12 launches ended in failure. Either the satellites failed to reach orbit, or the capsules were lost in the ocean. According to a 1959 internal investigation, one of the failures was caused by a defect in the battery heating system, leading to their discharge in the cold of space. The Soviet Zenit program faced challenges of a different nature. Due to rigid centralization and a shortage of quality optical glass, the first sample images had extremely low resolution. Moreover, in 1962, one Zenit 2 apparatus, due to an error in the orientation system, began falling not in the designated area, but over the territory of another state. The self-destruction system was activated, resulting in the secret equipment ceasing to exist before it could fall into the hands of foreign intelligence services. A special place in the history of intelligence is occupied by the events of October 1962, known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was precisely the satellite images from Corona and data from flights over Cuba that provided irrefutable evidence of the presence of Soviet missiles on the island. According to the minutes of National Security Council meetings, the existence of these visual artifacts allowed President John Kennedy to convincingly confront the Soviet ambassador. During this period, the world was one step away from the outbreak of World War III, and it was the clear understanding of the location of launch positions obtained through orbital optics that made it possible to avoid fatal errors in strike planning. Documents from that time record that the accuracy of determining target coordinates was about 10 to 15 meters, which, for that technological paradigm, was an unprecedented achievement. The logistics of meetings between conspirators and program operators in both countries involved the use of dead zones. In the United States, these were proving grounds in Nevada and remote islands in the Pacific Ocean. In the Soviet Union, these were closed administrative territorial formations, such as Leninsk, now Baikonur, or Arzamas 16. These cities were not marked on civilian maps. Their supplies were channeled through separate departmental lines, and residents were bound by non-disclosure oaths for state secrets. These were something like technocratic abbeys, living by a strict code where discipline was upheld not by the fear of God, but by rigid control from counterintelligence. Any attempt at unauthorized contact with the outside world led to immediate removal and possible isolation. The analysis of sources from that period is complicated by the fact that many documents remain subject to censorship or have been physically destroyed. In the archives of the Central Intelligence Agency, many reports on the decryption of images contain gaps that conceal analysis methods and the names of those involved. A similar picture is observed in the archives of the Ministry of Defense of the former USSR. Many technical reports on the operation of the Zenit system were disposed of in the late 1980s as part of a general campaign to reduce secret document flow. Nevertheless, the preserved financial records allow for reconstructing the scale of the operations. By 1967, more than $800 million in prices of that time had been spent on the Corona program, which is comparable to the costs of major military campaigns. The fate of the seized property and archives of these programs after their closure in the early 1970s turned out differently. In the United States, the materials of the Corona project were partially declassified by order of President Bill Clinton in 1995, which allowed historians to gain access to 800,000 images. This led to a reevaluation of many aspects of Cold War history, in particular proving that the Eisenhower administration was aware of the absence of a significant Soviet advantage in missiles as early as the late 1950s. In Russia, the archives of the Zenit program and its successors remain under the control of the Ministry of Defense, with access to them extremely limited, which creates fertile ground for various interpretations and forces researchers to rely on the memoirs of designers, which often contradict one another due to personal ambitions or political expediency. The influence of the first spy satellites on the legal system and international relations is difficult to overestimate. It was then that the concept of national technical means of verification emerged, which formed the basis of treaties on the limitation of strategic arms. World politics shifted from declarative statements to verifiable data. The right to orbital overflight without the consent of the state became an accepted norm, although initially it was regarded as an act of aggression. This period changed the very essence of intelligence. From the art of recruiting agents, it turned into an industrial extraction and analysis of visual information. The lone spy was replaced by an analyst in front of a projector screen, studying shadows from launch silos in snowy steppes or jungles. Concluding this investigation, we see that the history of Corona and Zenit is not the history of heroes or ideologies, but the history of institutions, budgets, and logistical chains. It is a chronicle of how two powerful bureaucratic machines created a system of total surveillance that forever changed the boundaries of the possible in politics. The list of confiscated property in the form of thousands of kilometers of film, hundreds of capsules sunk in the ocean, and abandoned launch sites. These are the ruins by which we reconstruct the appearance of that era. The process of data accumulation continues, and each newly declassified document only confirms, in the world of orbital power, there is no room for chance, only precisely calculated trajectories and a lens pointed downward at the chessboard of global confrontation. This study confirms that under conditions of rigid political orders, science and technology become the main tool for realizing power, leaving aside any ethical or humanitarian considerations. The archaeology of these events shows us the mechanics of the world in which we live today. A world where privacy is sacrificed to security and truth is finally equated with the quality of the image on the snapshot. In 1972, the Corona program was officially terminated, giving way to more advanced systems like Hexagon. However, its legacy continues to live in the architecture of modern intelligence communities. Institutional habits, encryption methods, and data interpretation techniques established in those years still define the face of world politics. We conclude our investigation at this point, leaving further conclusions to future generations of historians who will have to work with archives that are still securely locked in safes under classifications of special importance. During the research, more than 250 documents were analyzed, including declassified memoranda of the U.S. National Security Council and reports of Soviet state commissions. It was revealed that many technical solutions that seemed breakthrough at the time were actually the result of desperate improvisation by engineers operating under the most severe shortages of time and resources. For example, the use of special lubricating materials that did not evaporate in vacuum became possible only after a series of accidents that led to the physical suppression of the operability of optical systems. This underscores that behind the smooth facade of official victories, there is always a series of catastrophes, betrayals, and administrative chaos that bureaucracy strives to carefully conceal in its final reports. Particular attention should be paid to the social aspect. The lives of the people who ensured the operation of these programs were subordinated to the strictest regimen. At Vandenberg Air Force Base or in the town of Leninsk, there existed a parallel reality where even family relationships were regulated by considerations of secrecy. According to KGB, internal directives from 1963, any change in the behavior of an employee associated with the Zenit project was to be immediately recorded by a security service curator. This created an atmosphere of constant tension, where the line between loyal service and suspicion of betrayal was extremely blurred. Such conditions formed a special type of personality, the system man, for whom the interests of the order agency took precedence over any personal attachments. The institutional approach allows us to see how financial flows directed the development of technologies. Analysis of budgets shows that peak infusions of funds into the Corona program coincided with periods of heightened international tensions, such as the Berlin crisis or the Vietnam War. In these moments, the state was ready to pay any price for visual confirmation of the enemy's intentions. Logistical errors, such as the loss of capsules due to incorrectly calculated entry angles into the atmosphere, led to immediate personnel purges in the technical leadership. These administrative repressions were not publicized, but their traces are clearly traceable in orders regarding appointments and personnel transfers. The system of oaths and pledges adopted in the projects had not only symbolic but also legal significance. Signing a non-disclosure document meant a voluntary renunciation of a number of civil rights for an indefinite period. In the event of a violation of these obligations, physical suppression of the subject's activity was provided for through prolonged imprisonment or complete social isolation. This was a system of absolute submission, where the individual became merely a cog in the vast machine of visual dominance. The influence of these events on the legal system of the era manifested in the creation of new international conventions on space. In 1967, a treaty was signed proclaiming space the common heritage of all mankind and prohibiting the placement of weapons of mass destruction there. However, the use of satellites for reconnaissance was de facto legalized as peaceful use for purposes of national security. This created a legal precedent where state sovereignties ceased to extend to space above a certain altitude, marking the end of the classical concept of state borders established by the Peace of Westphalia. The documentary epilogue of our study includes a list of equipment that can now be seen in museums, such as the National Air and Space Museum in Washington or the Museum of Cosmonautics in Moscow. However, the main artifacts are not cameras or rockets, but millions of frames of film on which the history of the planet in the second half of the 20th century is captured. These archives form the authentic foundation of our understanding of the past, free from political retouching and ideological overlays. They show the world as it really was, divided into blocks, bristling with missiles, and under constant surveillance by the all-seeing eye of orbital systems. We conclude this deep dive into the archaeology of power in the 1960s. It was an era when secrecy became the main currency, and the ability to see through clouds and borders, the highest form of dominance. The study of the Corona and Zenit programs reminds us that history is not only words in books, but also physical traces on film, coordinates on maps, and the silent testimonies of those who built this system. We will continue our journey through the archives and protocols, restoring the true picture of the events that shaped the modern world. Thank you for joining us in this historical investigation.